Okay, we finished the respiratory system, and we're moving into our next system, which is the digestive system. Okay. So, for those of you that have not had AMP, the digestive system is divided into the gastrointestinal tract. This is from the mouth all the way from in and out. And most of these particular, that whole section is protected by this covering called the peritoneum. Then you have these accessory organs that are involved in providing digestive secretions and that sort of thing. And again, if you have an AMP, it's pretty good. So you're going to grind the teeth, that's accessory, but you're going to swallow that. It's going to go all the way down into the tummy, into the small and large intestines, and then out. And you've got these accessory organs of the gallbladder, which is going to secrete bile to help you digest the lipids, and the liver is going to detox. And the pancreas is the big guy that produces digestive enzymes. So you have all these organs that are going to help with this. So the bottom line is it does digest food, it absorbs the nutrients. The nutrients are going to be absorbed by the intestinal tract, a few by the stomach, but not too many. It absorbs the water into the bloodstream and eliminates the waste. So when you look at this, you can look at the different components and what they do. You can, that's anatomy and physiology. You're going to learn that. Now, in terms of the microbiota of the digestive system, you've got the esophagus, the stomach, and the duodenum, okay, which is the first part of the small intestine, is usually free of microbes unless something gets in. Basically, you've got a lot of normal flora in the mouth, and that's going to hopefully take care of these microbes. So when you swallow it, it's relatively free of microbes. And then you hit the stomach, which is a very high, very highly acidic environment, and that's going to kill almost everything. And also, there's a pretty rapid transport of food. I mean, you swallow it, and you put it in your mouth and you swallow it, and it gets down in the stomach pretty quickly. So you're not going to really get a whole bunch of colonization there. The mouth will have, the tongue and the teeth will have normal flora. Streptococcus viridans is the most prevalent there. And then you get into the lower, a little bit lower, the small intestine, the colon, you're going to have lots of normal flora in there because they're helping, with the nutrients. They are microbial antagonists. You have a mucous membrane that prevents the microbes from entering the bloodstream. So there's a whole thing that, we get them down into the intestinal tract, get them processed through the stomach pretty quickly, and into the intestinal tract where we do absorb our nutrients, and we need that microbiota, and that's where it's important to see that. In terms of the mouth, dental caries, or those lovely cavities as we call them, appear as holes or pits in the teeth. And they're caused by Streptococcus mutans, sometimes Streptococcus durans, and some others. But basically, you get a biofilm that forms on the teeth, and it can cause your cavities. Periodontal disease, where the gums are swollen and bright and tender. There is the gingivitis. or from Mornus gingivalis breaks down that has an enzyme that breaks down the gingiva of the mouth and causes diseases. I don't go too crazy on the mouth, just understanding that it's the bacteria that's causing the cavities. Okay. All right, and then we start to look at gastroenteritis and the stomach. We're getting down in the stomach. I've already mentioned about Helicobacter pylori and its unique ability to survive the stomach acid. But you do get ulcers because the Helicobacter pylori, which is protected, has its own little protection around it, okay, can invade the mucus and attach to the epithelial cells of the stomach, and it has a toxin, and it will inflame this and make it thin. And then once you do this, you've got a very acidic gastric juice, pH, 1 and 2, and it's just going to eat into these cells. And that's what's going to cause the ulcer. Okay. Another disease that we see with this, again, we've talked about cholera once before being caused by Vibrio cholerae. And it is contracted by ingesting contaminated water or food. And yeah, it's very acute, very life-threatening diarrhea. You can lose 20 liters of fluid a day. Yeah, and basically it's cholera. Again, its reservoir is water, so it can cause all kinds of problems. Without rapid rehydration, it will lead to dehydration and death within hours. Usually your symptoms are going to basically you're going to ingest that contaminated water or sometimes raw or uncooked seafood because on it. And you get the symptoms appearing within 12 hours to 5 days, usually pretty quickly. But the main sign is what we call rice water diarrhea. And that's in the severe cholera. And it just basically, rice water stools. It looks like the water that's left over after you cook the rice because there's just nothing being absorbed. It's just running through your system. You can get mild to moderate. Some of these don't exhibit any symptoms or only mild diarrhea, but if it gets into the severe, about 20% of these patients develop this profuse diarrhea, about 18 to 20 liters a day, vomiting, and this leads very quickly to extreme dehydration, which can be fatal. The susceptibility on this is people that live in, and we've talked about this, endemic areas. There are some areas, in South America, Peru is notorious for it. India, Africa, they're notorious for having these cholera. The problem is the cholera toxin. It is a potent protein complex. We've talked about these AB toxins, and it belongs to this family as one active subunit. You don't have to notice 5 binding sites. The treatment is just fluid replacement, electrolyte replacement. Preventing this is in the endemic areas, boil the water. Don't drink the water. Eat only fully cooked foods. Avoid raw fruits and vegetables. So if you're going into an endemic area, you probably won't be able to get the cholera vaccine. You may not, but be careful what you eat. And this is what Vibrio looks like. Again, these are these curved rods. This is basically diagnostic for it. This is what we look for. And you can see what it does. The toxin will bind to the epithelial membrane, and you can see the A and B portions. And the bottom line is it just stimulates the cell to secrete sodium and other electrolytes. And where goes the sodium, so goes the water. So it stimulates these cells to secrete the sodium, and the water follows it. Okay. All right, we've already mentioned the peptic ulcers. I will mention on this, Helicobacter has the flagella, it has the adhesins, it has the urease that we talked about that helps protect it from the acid to enclose it. The portal of entry on this is usually fecal-oral transmission. You can see primarily what you get is abdominal pain, nausea, and vomiting. And susceptibility for these ulcers is if you're colonized by H. pylori. Okay. The treatment is a 2-week course of some proton pump inhibitors to reduce the stomach acid with 2 or more antibiotics to clear the bacteria. Helicobacter is developing a growing resistance to certain drugs. So you have to do them in combo and to ensure that you've completely cleared that. And the prevention is lifestyle changes, okay? Basically trying not to aggravate these guys. I mean, a lot of times Helicobacter can be because you've overtaken some antibiotics and stuff, but yeah, just trying to get through this. Shigella. This can get to be pretty interesting. There are several different Shigellas. Obviously, the worst one is the first one, Shigella dysenteriae. It produces these enterotoxins, such as Shiga toxin, which is named after Shigella. All right. And basically what you do is you ingest via the fecal-oral route, and this organism colonizes the cells of the small and then spreads into the large intestine. And you get abdominal cramps, bloody stools, nausea and vomiting. The real susceptibility of this are children and immunocompromised patients. I keep saying that again and again and again. And we will make the diagnosis by finding Shigella in the stool. Again, we're going to look for an O&P and a culture on that stool, and we should be able to grow that out. The treatment on that is fluid and electrolyte replacement and an antimicrobial. There is a vaccine for endemic areas for Shigella flexneri, FYI. Now, Shiga toxin becomes important because you're going to get this in other organisms too, but Shiga toxin is a very potent poison. Some bacteria, most notably the Shigella dysenteriae, but also some E. coli. Okay, we'll talk about this E. coli when we get there, but there is an E. coli, the Shiga toxin producing Escherichia coli, which is the one that causes all kinds of issues. And what it does is it works by stopping protein synthesis within the host cells, which causes severe damage to the lining of the intestinal tract, bloody diarrhea, and life-threatening kidney complications. It can shut down the kidneys, and it can kill you. And whenever you hear of an outbreak of, the hemorrhagic E. coli, this is really what we're talking about. Okay, this is that E. coli that has this Shiga toxin. So you can see what happens is the Shigella attaches to the colon. It triggers endocytosis, and they bring it into your lovely little cells, and it invades the cells, and it forms abscesses. An abscess forms as these epithelial cells are killed. And then basically what happens is that the phagocyte is trying to kill it. The Shigella enters the blood quickly and is phagocytized and destroyed. Okay, that's just the way it gets in. All right, traveler's diarrhea or E. coli. Yeah, you can see this. There are different strains of E. coli, so it depends on how bad it is. But you can see the virulence factors that it has. It has fimbriae, which allow it to attach. There are adhesins, and again, some have this Shigella-like toxin. The diarrhea basically is caused by the enterotoxins that are produced. And this is just eating, uncooked foods, and you get abdominal cramps and bloody stools and nausea and vomiting and diarrhea. Kids, again, are most susceptible, as well as the immunocompromised. And again, you get the fluid and electrolyte replacement if you need it, depending upon how bad the diarrhea is. But the bottom line is, cook your food properly. Your proper preparation of your food can get rid of a lot of this stuff. Okay? Another one is Campylobacter. Campylobacter jejuni. This is the leading global cause of foodborne illness. Okay? And it usually results from consuming undercooked poultry and raw milk and contaminated food. But it's the poultry, the raw poultry or undercooked poultry that is really usually the problem with this, or salmonella. And again, you ingest this, signs and symptoms about the same. Abdominal cramps, bloody stools, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. That's what makes, when you get a gastrointestinal disease, so interesting to try and diagnose for the physicians. But we can get an O&P and we can get a culture, and we can culture these guys out, and that tells them, what it is. It does have virulence factors, does have adhesins, does have cytotoxins, does have an endotoxin. And the difference is that the virulence factors will produce bleeding lesions and trigger some inflammation, so it can get pretty nasty. And again, it's the kids and the immunocompromised that are most susceptible. And again, we're going to diagnose it by the signs and symptoms, but we're going to grow it out in the culture. Okay. Most of these guys will resolve themselves without treating. You may need, in severe cases, fluid replacement and antimicrobials, but the main thing is proper hygiene after handling raw poultry. Okay. Be careful when you put raw poultry. Wash your hands and wash everything that raw poultry touched. And this is also putting the raw poultry in your refrigerator. Make sure, there's nothing underneath it. You put it in a container so that raw poultry is contained, so it doesn't spread through your refrigerator. Just simple things that will help you. All right. Campylobacter, this is a spiral bacteria. So this is kind of what we're looking for. So notice that spiral shape. Salmonella, lovely salmonella. Salmonella, there are serotypes. This is a group of bacteria that causes salmonellosis. It's a common foodborne illness. Look again, diarrhea, fever, stomach cramps, blah, blah, blah. Usually with salmonella, you'll get within 6 hours. A lot of times it'll say this. The same thing with staph when it gets in there. But it usually develops pretty quickly and can last up to a week, and most people will get through it because it causes basically, again, a general gastroenteritis with fever and headache and that sort of thing that you see. Usually, most of the time, it's found in when you travel in areas with poor sanitation. I mean, this is contaminated, usually food or water. So, um, it's where you basically get into some areas where there's not good sanitation. Um, Salmonella, you can see this attaches to the epithelial lining. It enters via endocytosis. It multiplies in a food vesicle, and then it kills the host and the same thing, and then enters into the bloodstream. We can pick this up very easily. Again, this is one of these that we can culture fairly easily. And, we get a lot of, you get diarrhea, nausea, vomiting. You're going to get the lab is going to get some cultures, and we will go looking for whatever organism it might possibly be. Some of the things that salmonella can do, it is ingested, contaminated food, water, and here's another one, chicken eggs. So, be careful. And you can see that what it does. And there are different serotypes of salmonella, salmonella enteritis and the typhi. Typhi can establish a semi-permanent infection in the gallbladder, so you can be a carrier and remain infected for years even without treatment. The salmonella can be carried to the liver and the spleen and the gallbladder. So, hopefully you don't turn into being a carrier of this stuff. Another salmonella that's more important with typhi, as we just talked about with typhi here. When we talk here, this can enter the bloodstream and that sort of thing. Salmonella typhi causes typhoid fever, and it can be life-threatening. It is caused by Salmonella enterica serotype typhi. Contaminated food or water, contact with infected person. You can see the time, and you can range from mild to severe symptoms. And again, we talked about typhoid fever before, but basically it's a sustained gradual fever, and it can get up pretty high, and a rash and that sort of thing. So typhoid fever, again, it's in the stool. We can pick it up. The signs and symptoms are very close to salmonella, but you have more complications with typhoid fever, intestinal hemorrhage, kidney failure, peritonitis, that sort of thing. The main thing is, if you're going to an endemic area, be aware, and proper sanitation and food handling. Don't drink the water. Make sure the food is fully cooked. Okay. So I gave you this kind of synopsis, this summary of all these guys, and you can see that hemorrhagic E. coli 0157H7, and you can see the complication is death. And it's that incubation period for the enterohemorrhagic E. coli is much shorter, is a very short time, and look at the difference. Okay, nice ramen, but this one is, this is serious. It can cause a hemolytic uremic syndrome, which causes kidney failure, and this is one of the problems with the enterohemorrhagic E. coli. Okay, so you can this is kind of like a synopsis, and you can take a look at that. All right, food poisoning is used. A lot of this is due to Staph aureus. Yeah. And again, this particular staph has 5 enterotoxins. Ooh. Usually this is very quick onset. Usually 4 to 6 hours. Boom, you know it. You're sick. And again, sometimes the diagnosis is difficult because it just so rapidly goes, and then you just get sick, and you start with the nausea and the vomiting and the diarrhea and the stomach cramps and on and on and on. Usually with this, it is fairly self-limiting. You get it out of your system. And this is the thing that's interesting about the intestinal tract is that when it detects something like this that is not good, the reason why you get the nausea and the vomiting and the diarrhea is because it's trying to get it out of the system. Word has gotten back, you know, to the immune system, there is something wrong with this water or this food that you've ingested, and we need to get it out. And so when you get something like this, it's going to try very hard to get this stuff out of the system. So those are your bacterial ones. And then we have viral diseases. These can cause symptoms that are similar to the bacterially caused ones, depending on what it is. And see gastroenteritis, and so on. Herpes, caused by herpes simplex virus type 1. This is the cold sores. This is transmitted via close contact with infected individuals with active lesions. And the signs and symptoms are obviously the cold sores. They're painful, they're itchy, usually on the lips. And the diagnosis is really characteristics recurring lesions. You just keep recurring. And the treatment, a lot of time, is acyclovir generally. Can reduce the duration of the lesion and the shedding. It is not a cure because the virus can establish a latent infection, which can reactivate. So you have to really go on this. And the prevention is obviously avoiding contact. And I've got a picture of these lesions. Yeah. Okay. The viral gastroenteritis, typically less severe than the bacterial. It is, the symptoms are similar, but usually less severe. However, they can be pains in the butt. No puns intended. But if you think about how many times you've heard about norovirus and rotavirus, okay? And basically you get this because you have ingested contaminated food or water again. Most of the cases are going to occur in the winter. But we have particular problems with these cruise ships for the norovirus. And again, the norovirus is usually seen in adults in confined spaces. It is not unusual for these cruise ships to have norovirus. I think I mentioned already, I was Alaskan cruise and we had to board late because the ship had been contaminated norovirus. Well, I don't know about you, but I cleaned my room down even though they said they disinfected it. Yeah. Rotavirus is more common in the young children. So, again, abdominal pain, cramping, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, and we're not going to see anything in a culture because this is a virus. But we do have rapid tests for these organisms, so we can test other ways. Okay. There is a serological test that distinguishes, and the treatment is based on fluid and electrolyte replacement. And I did mention there is a vaccine for rotavirus. So if the kids are going somewhere, you can vaccinate these kids against rotavirus, which is sometimes a good idea. Just FYI. Hepatitis. Boy, this can be a toughie. It is inflammation of the liver. And this becomes very important in the healthcare field. You can see the symptoms may occur years after initial infection. You may not even know you have it. But acute hepatitis, jaundice, abdominal pain, fatigue, nausea, vomiting. Basically, it depends on the type of virus. And some of these we'll talk about are bloodborne pathogens, and some of them are not. So we just generally say hepatitis A virus, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, hepatitis D, or Delta, and hepatitis E. You probably didn't even know about those others. A, B, and C is what is seen really in the United States. Okay. So I've given you a little chart so that you can see that these really are different viruses. I mean, some of them are single-stranded RNA viruses, some are with a positive sense, and some negative sense, but they're all slightly different, okay? Some of them have envelopes, some of them don't. Some of them are fecal oral transmission, particularly hepatitis A, hepatitis E. B, C, and Delta are bloodborne. They all have different incubation periods. Some of these, usually hepatitis A, usually fairly mild, okay, very low mortality rate. Hepatitis B, different. We can have a fairly severe mortality rate on this. Hepatitis C is interesting. We used to call it, you can see, we used to call this infectious hepatitis, serum hepatitis, and non-A, non-B. So we started seeing first infectious hepatitis and the serum hepatitis. And then we started seeing in the 70s this hepatitis that wasn't A and wasn't B. So they called it non-A, non-B. And they finally decided, okay, we got to rename these because we're finding more. And hepatitis C can cause cancer. Hepatitis B can cause cancer. Hepatitis D can cause cirrhosis. Hepatitis C is one that we see chronically with a lot of patients. Just FYI, it is usually here's the thing, it's usually subclinical. It's hard to see. People don't know they have it. And this is one of the problems with hepatitis C. I mean, I know you've heard of plenty of people, stars that have hepatitis C. It's not, not the best. Hepatitis D is not usually found in the United States. It's usually found in the Southeast Asia area. And what's interesting with, you can see it requires a simultaneous hepatitis B infection. So you have to have hepatitis B in order to get hepatitis D. So this is a very unusual kind of thing. And so you get both of them together. So the severity can be very high. And again, we're usually seeing that in the Southeast Asia area. And then there is hepatitis E, which is fairly mild, but can be very severe in pregnant women. So again, this is one, we don't usually see it in the United States, but you go outside and you can get this. We can do serologic testing for all 5 types. Your blood products and everything are tested for these guys, for the bloodborne pathogens. So any of these that it says bloodborne, yeah, we will test any blood product to make sure that it is not spread via the blood products. Initial diagnosis, depending on what it is, but observation of jaundice, and then if we suspect it, we can do the serologic testing. Hepatitis B is diagnosed by the presence of these proteins, the antigens. There's a whole sequence when you look at hepatitis B. We will test we can basically test where you are in the disease by looking at the antigens, antibodies. There's a hepatitis core antigen, on the core, you form hepatitis you form core antibodies. So we look at where these are coming out, and at what time they're coming out, and if you've got antigens and you haven't got antibodies, you're newer in the infection than you are in the later stages. And so we can start to see, just by doing some different antigens and antibodies towards the B, it will tell us where we are in the disease itself. It's not important that you guys know it right away, but you can see some of this. I put this picture. There's the core antigen, there's the surface antigen, and you actually form antibodies to these. So you can have a hepatitis B surface antibody that circulates, and that tells us again where we are in that disease. Okay. We do have vaccines. I will go back. We do have vaccines for hepatitis A, hepatitis B. We have now a treatment for hepatitis C, and it's working pretty well. I've seen it work pretty well for the kids that are born with the hepatitis C. And so we're starting to make some real progress with the hepatitis. Wanted to go into, these are protozoal infections of the intestinal tract, and there's three main ones. And the first one is Cryptosporidium, and it is because you are consuming infected water. It's contaminated water, fecal oral transmission. If you notice, a lot of these in the intestinal tract, it's fecal oral. It's what you drank or what you ate. So be careful. You can get life-threatening complications, but it's really from drinking contaminated water. When I travel, I always take my own water. What can I say? Will cause a severe, watery diarrhea accompanied by a headache, muscle pains. Immunocompromised are most at risk for serious complications. This is one we can see in the OMP. We can see the oocysts, and this is what they look like, these lovely little oocysts, and this is what we're looking for. So yeah, this is fun to try and figure out what you've got. You can have problems with amoebas. The most common one is Entamoeba histolytica, and you can see the signs and symptoms, and it can be very asymptomatic to severe to being invasive. So some of these guys can get to be interesting. Again, ingestion of contaminated food and water. We've got that every time, don't we? The incubation phase depends, but usually within 6 to 20 days. And it's usually due to poor sanitation. And there are anti-amoebic drugs that can be given, but the bottom line is, avoid contaminated food and water. I'm not scaring you enough about traveling and handling your own food and water. Yeah. All I can say is that's what I do. This is Entamoeba histolytica. To me, it looks like a fried egg. That's the easier way for me to recognize it. We've talked about Giardia before. Giardia lamblia, they've now reclassified it and renamed it to Giardia intestinalis. Okay. I'm probably still going to call it lamblia because I've known it that way for years. We've talked about this. It causes greasy, frothy, fatty diarrhea with this horrible odor. We don't like to get specimens in the lab with somebody with Giardia, sorry. Incubation is usually 1 to 2 weeks. Susceptibility are hikers and campers who drink from contaminated streams. So please don't do that. There are medications that can be given. But the main thing is just don't consume untreated water. If you're out there hiking, rafting and that kind of stuff, bring your own water. Okay? And I think I've already showed you what Jardy looks like. It's easy, cute little guy. Just nasty. Okay, and then we have to get into our worms. We're almost there. The tapeworms, the helmets, the tapeworm is the most common that we see. They are macroscopic multicellular worms. They can infest the GI tract as causing parasites. As I said, you can get a tapeworm, and it can live there for quite a while. Okay. They exist as intestinal parasites. They lack their own digestive system. So the tapeworm, we're going to go through this. I have it in the lab to find out pretty well for you. It is flat. This is a flat worm. There are flat worms and round worms, and we'll talk about the different, phylums of these guys. That's in your lab. But they're flat and they're segmented, and they look like a tape measure. Seriously. Usually asymptomatic, rarely causes problems. Problem is eating uncooked beef or pork. We talked about. And we've gone through basically this again. You had it in your helmets lecture, and then again there is that scolex, there's those mature segments, and there is the eggs. So these guys generally, again, usually because it can be in the system for quite a long time. Typically asymptomatic. We may see worm segments in the feces and be able to recognize this. The highest prevalence of this is areas of poor sanitation treatment and where you live closely with livestock of some kind. That's where we usually see it. Usually we can see the proglottids in the fecal sample, and there are some anti-helminth medications that we can use to treat this, and we can prevent it by thoroughly cooking our foods. Again, pinworms. This is a real problem in kids. And we've kind of gone through this again. I'm just going to briefly go through this because we went through this in more detail. But these are long, thin, unsegmented helmets. Asymptomatic in a third of the cases. Symptomatic, this perianal itching, especially at night when the females come out and deposit their eggs. So the organism is Enterobius vermicularis. Yeah, that's it. And we've already talked about that. So prevention is really personal hygiene. I did give you a few more worms in your lab portion, but these are the kind of major ones that I wanted to go over because these are the more important ones. And you can see how small they are. They're just like a little over a half an inch long. So these are not very long guys. All right, so that's digestive system. And next we'll be looking at the urinary tract.